I now give the floor to His Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, to deliver his welcome remarks.
Your Excellency, President Chakwera, Your Highness, Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. I want to deeply thank Qatar for hosting us in Doha and for launching the Programme of Action for Least Developed Countries. Your Highness, I'm deeply grateful for the extraordinary generosity and hospitality of the government and people of Qatar. Excellencies, countries with the least support the most, and the need of support is something that is required now. You represent 1 in 8 people on earth, and I have an enormous admiration for your remarkable efforts to achieve graduation and to sustain graduation. But your countries are also trapped in vicious cycles that make development difficult. And I can reassure you that we are perfectly aware of the inequities created by our unfair global economic and financial system and determined to change it by reforms and by adequate sources of support to least developed countries. Because economic development is challenging when countries are starved for resources, drowning in debt, and still struggling with the historic injustice of an unequal COVID-19 response, starting by vaccines and then by the very unfair access to the resources needed for recovery. Human development is also challenging when education, healthcare and social protection systems are struggling, and when women are denied their rightful place at the table across every aspect of civil, economic and political life. A thriving business community and the creation of decent jobs is challenging if economies are stuck in first gear, exporting raw materials without opportunities for structural transformation to rapidly move up the value chain. And combating climate catastrophe that you did nothing to cause is challenging when the cost of capital is sky high and the financial support you receive to mitigate and adapt to the destruction is a drop in the bucket. Meanwhile, bigger economies continue to heat our planet and spew greenhouse gas emissions at record rates. And fossil fuel giants are raking in huge profits, while millions in your countries cannot put food on the table. You risk to be left behind in the digital revolution without the support of technology you need for social and economic development or job creation. Easing the cost of living crisis grows most difficult by the day, with the war in Ukraine accelerating the rise in prices of energy and food. Add the impacts of conflicts, droughts, hunger and extreme poverty, and the result is a perfect storm for perpetuating poverty and injustice. We must end this storm. But we must recognize that to end this storm, we require massive and sustainable investment. And least developed countries require and deserve massive financial and economic support. For your countries, progress on the Sustainable Development Goals, starting with the eradication of extreme poverty and ending hunger, is about more than lines on a chart leading to 2030. It is a matter of life and death, and it is unacceptable if you are held back by processes and decisions that are made far beyond your borders. Indeed, our global financial system was designed by wealthy countries and largely to their benefit. That is why we are insisting so strongly, namely with the G20, for its reform. Deprived of liquidity, many of you are locked out of capital markets by predatory interest rates. And deprived of effective debt relief, you can be forced to spend an ever-growing share of government revenue on debt service costs. Instead of the official development assistance at the levels that you need, most developed countries are falling short of their promise to provide 0.15 to 0.20% of their gross domestic national income to least developed countries. And countries that graduate to middle-income status are victims of the cruelest sleight of hand trick when support systems vanish before their eyes. Graduation must be a reward, never a punishment. So, Excellencies, in the midst of these injustices, the United Nations is working with you to develop smooth transition strategies based on tailored support for the graduation process. We cannot allow countries to fall back down the development ladder after working so hard to climb it. That is why the Doha Programme of Action includes an online university to provide your countries with better access to science, expertise and technology to develop more innovative and diverse economies and workforces. At this time of widespread food insecurity, the creation of a food stock holding system for least developed countries will be another tangible outcome of this summit to combat hunger and skyrocketing food prices. And the Doha Programme of Action also includes the establishment of an international investment support centre to help least developed and graduated countries attract foreign investment. Excellences,
Your Excellencies, at tomorrow's plenary, I will outline a number of critical actions to transform the Programme of Action into results. Central to our efforts is the SDG stimulus, which we presented at the G20, which calls for a significant increase in financing for sustainable development to reach a minimum of $500 billion a year. The stimulus also aims to tackle the high cost of debt through efforts to lower interest rates while improving the lending terms of multilateral development banks, and it aims to expand contingency financing to countries in need, including by integrating disaster and pandemic clauses into lending instruments and accelerating the reallocation of special drawing rights. We will also keep pushing for the resources already promised for climate adaptation, a just energy transition, and loss and damage, as well as for early warning systems for all by 2027. For natural disasters, we also need to develop a fairer tax system and fight illicit financial flows, money laundering, and tax evasion that drain domestic resources of a large number of developing countries. And we must find new common sense ways to measure countries' economies, such as developing lending criteria that go beyond gross domestic product to provide a true view of the value of natural capital, such as the preservation of forests, watersheds, and marine resources. Today, when we destroy forests, overfish, or burn fossil fuels, that is recorded as a boost to gross domestic product. And large parts of the care economy, in particular in developing countries, are not even taken into account. This is nonsense. We measure development in a completely wrong way. Excellencies, this must be a moment of justice for least developed countries. Let's work together to provide new avenues of support for your people. Let's make the LDC category history. Thank you very much.